CP Nationals. Yeah, excellent. On government, we have some dinos, the U of T law students, Patrick and Guy. On opposition, a dino and slightly less one, Diggory and Danielle. Government, what is the motion?
Before that, can I do my sappy, final
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so first, I'd like to, Okay, I don't want to cry, but I will probably cry. As people who actually know me, I cry all the fucking time. So, Kai, thanks so much for doing this tournament with me. It's been an absolute pleasure. For people who don't know, before this speech, I explained to Kai that the reason why I've been a career judge for the past 5 years, despite hanging around debate, promising people I'd go to a tournament with them, but then ultimately flaking on them in the last minute, sometimes in the 11th hour, is I have a lot of anxiety about this activity emerging from things that happened in my 4th year. And when I told this to Kai, he was super supporting, and I'm glad that I got to have this excellent tournament experience with him. So the last time I ever debate, probably, I'm so glad it's with you. Can I have a hug?
Oh. Sensational. Now the motion.
Okay, the motion is off choice. I will send it to the Discord as soon as I start reading it. Are you guys ready in the Discord?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The motion clarification?
Yep. Okay. Oh, fuck, sorry. Sprezzatura is the Italian concept of studied carelessness, especially as character quality or style of art and literature. When applied to art, it manifests as things like destroying all preparatory work, i.e. rough drafts, sketches, etc., to make it seem like the final creation of the art was effortless. It is a norm about the process of creating art rather than the outcome of the art. So it's not about any particular artistic style. During the Renaissance art period, between the 14th to 16th century Italy, Sprezzatura was the dominant force in artist behavior. They practiced it for the sake of appearing as though their hands were guided by God, that their groundbreaking creations that fundamentally transformed the Western art world were divinely inspired, and that their works were the product of God's favor. This has resulted in very few surviving pieces of preparation works for art that was created in this period, whether dominant or otherwise. The motion is of choice. You are a relatively successful 15th century Renaissance painter. Do you practice Sprezzatura or not?
A minute for questions.
How prominent is this practice? Is everybody doing it? Or
Yes, everybody's doing it. It's like the dominant norm.
is there a alternative norm that is common?
Don't destroy your preparatory work.
Okay, cool.
Just don't opt into it at all. It's a pretty strict economy. Do you pretend like God is guiding your hand in making these fantastic paintings, and you're doing it effortlessly or not?
How much preparatory work do these kinds of work, paintings require?
Great question. So Renaissance art was super high scale and required a lot of technical expertise. So when we're talking about Renaissance art, we're talking about the murals that cover the Vatican, right?
Yeah.
Or beautiful murals that cover the Medici Palace. So it is quite an obscene amount of work.
Okay, I think we're probably good.
Okay.
Okay. Off, what do you think?
We're gonna practice Sprezzatura or whatever.
Naturally, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. PM, whenever you're ready, just tell us what time split you're going to do before you start your speech.
We're gonna do 6-4. Panel, are you ready?
Yeah.
A couple of things I need to explain at the top of my speech to make this debate fair. First, I'm going to explain the economics of the art world in Renaissance Italy. And second, I'm going to explain the process of making art, just so you guys have this and it's like a fair adjudication. It's good for your side as well. That is, the vast majority of art occurs from a commission-based model. That is, people like the Medicis or the Pope commission you to do these sorts of things. Second, as I already said in the question and answer period, it's like a lot of work. You have workshops, you have artists working under you, etc. Just want to make sure this is a fair debate. We have 5 arguments. First, we think that this not opting into this practice is going to lead you to create the best art possible. Second, we're going to talk about how creating that best art possible allows you to differentiate yourself in the market. That is, we think opposition is likely to talk about how you need to opt into this norm to be able to get value within the Renaissance art world. Third, we're going to talk about breaking free from the limits of your period and why there is incentive structure, even with the actor set, as to why it is that you probably want to be a little bit different. 4, we're going to talk about protecting your legacy in the long term. 5, we're going to talk about how this is the only way you get the chance to personally engage with your art. That is that, as I already flagged, the vast majority of art in this world is stuff that's not being made personally. That is, you can't conceive of this in the way we conceive of art now, whereas you can like create your giant painting for yourself and hang it in your room. It's going to the Medicis because of the high price for doing it, so you as an artist don't have the ability to engage in it in an active way. First argument, how this leads you to creating the best art possible. We think that, as already flagged, it takes a massive amount of technical expertise and work to produce this art. So the problem is that you've probably spent your entire time as an artist training up keeping your preparatory work. That is, to give a concrete example of this, doing things like your figure studies. During the Renaissance art period, this was highly characterized by doing things like providing very impressive depictions of the human form. So these are examples like David, which is a sculpture, but the same thing applies to painting. That is, providing a new technical expertise to typical forms to make it particularly beautiful. The problem, though, is that when you opt into Sprezzatura, you abandon all the ways you produced art previously. That is, you spent your entire art career not destroying your preparatory work, being able to look back on previous things, being able to be open about this and use it for future art. The mechanism here is that when you're producing these mass level scale paintings, you don't need to be doing this preparatory work every single time and then discarding it and destroying it and not allowing people access to it. What that means is you're probably going to be able to produce art at a much faster rate, at a much more skilled rate than your competition, and therefore differentiate yourself in the market that way. Note that because of the commission-based model of this period, people were getting very impressive art to basically one-up each other. That is, the Medicis wanted to be able to flex on their, their competition within the Italian, patrician society. Similarly, the Pope wanted to demonstrate their vast amount of wealth to attract people within the Catholic Church and demonstrate their shows of power. That is, there's always going to be a market for the best technical work possible. We think just if you look at any Renaissance art, you'll see the way that this technical expertise characterizes it. What happens here then is that because you're able to differentiate yourself in the market, while all of these other fools are destroying all their preparatory work, you have the unique ability to be able to invoke all of that to produce the best technical expertise. What follows from that then is that you now have the ability to be at least competitive in the market with everybody else. That is, even if that there is some trade-off here, reasonably, that there are very few artists within this period who are able to produce level at this expertise. Note that because of the high amount of work you have to do, the high amount of technical expertise, and the fairly lack of artistic training that existed in this period, it was very difficult to be able to become somebody like Donatello because of the high cost for entering this market, that there's probably going to be competition, but it's not going to be that much of a trade-off. That is, once you've already developed this expertise, people already have the incentive to invest in your work, but now you also have the ability to differentiate that work because it's much more technical and much more fluid. So you're still going to be able to succeed within the art market. But it's not just that you're going to be able to succeed, it's probably that you're going to be able to succeed much more in a way that protects your legacy in a better way. That is, at the point where you're note that the Renaissance period was heavily contextualized by looking back at the old masters. That is the stuff that survived from the Greco-Roman period. Note that a lot of this stuff was incomplete works or tarnished works or preparatory work. This is about being able to protect your legacies then in two ways. First, you have all of these things that are likely to survive. If the vast amount of preparatory works to going to creating any significant piece of art is just going to produce a ton of stuff that is then going to survive and continue to exist beyond that. But second, it's also about differentiating yourself by creating the best technical art. That is, you'll be able to guarantee your legacy by being one of the most technical, best expertise, being able to produce a lot more work than everybody else because you can rely on that preparatory work to do things much faster, and your workshop is turning out things much faster, and you're just going to be hitting the wide scope, and that's likely to not only give you access to the market, but also likely to differentiate yourself within the market and succeed particularly that way. Let's conceive of why, from your perspective, you should heavily prioritize your legacy. You are an artist. You know your life is fleeting. You don't have long in this world. You're confined by mortality. What that means then is that you want your art to be immortal. You want your art to stand out as the thing that is most significant and is the most echoing of your legacy. This is how you echo through the tides of history. Yeah.
You don't perceive this as legacy because you're going against a dominant norm, which means you actively think that these are not going to be good things for the perception of the future. You don't live in modern society.
Note that Sprezzatura is a relatively finite time that characterizes this period. That is, the old masters that you look to and all of history prior to the Renaissance period didn't invoke this norm. That is, similarly, the mechanism I already gave you about the fact that you got good at art by not opting into this norm, you're plausibly going to see that that's actually just fundamentally not true. Final argument, and this is my favorite one about this debate. What matters in this debate is being able to engage in your art, not only in terms of the overall market and your legacy, but personally. That is, if you're an artist who's been fundamentally alienated from your work because it becomes the property of wealthy people that you don't have the ability to engage in, and you don't have the ability to engage in your art in any way, that's likely to be alienating in the sense that you don't have any ownership of your art anymore. On our side of the house, where you can keep preparatory work, you can keep these other things that go into it, that are going to be funded by the Medicis because they're paying for these things to be produced, that provides a way of catharsis. That is that you're going to be able to look at your own work that you've produced and not be alienated from your labor. This is leads you to be less likely burned out, which means you're going to have a much more successful career within the long term, which similarly differentiates yourself in the market and ensures your legacy. Panel, Sprezzatura is kind of cool, but I think that in terms of these framing, in terms of legacy, in terms of your own relationship with art, you should absolutely not do it. Proud to propose.
Great. Leader of the opposition. Are you doing 773 or 710?
710 for sure. At least I assume, Daniel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll also do a little speech. Why not? Debate is really meaningful. I think in a lot of ways it's like the best thing to ever happen to my life. So thank everybody for putting up with my sometimes insane antics. Thanks especially, of course, to Daniel, who's just like an awesome guy, super, super cool, really, really smart, incredibly successful. You all know who he is. You all know why he's cool. Debating with him is amazing. Thank you, Nicholas, of course, for everything. Thanks, Pat. You're like super cool guy. We don't know each other too well, but you've always been
in my house twice.
Well, yeah, but it's like compared to Nick and Daniel, but and thanks, of course, to my wonderful students sitting in the back there. It's kind of amazing to me that me and Annie who's not here, but it's just crazy that I have gotten enough out of this activity that I have people who want to learn what I have to say. This is amazing. Okay, I'll start with the serious stuff. I really, really like giving incredibly grandiose public speaking style speeches, but the reality of being an artist, which I kind of think debate is a little bit of an art, is that to succeed, you generally do need to conform to the reality and standards of your time. A huge number of the kinds of people who have been very profitable artists are often not the people who necessarily get remembered. And I think a lot of Pat's analysis is true in this respect, like people like Marlowe, who now many people don't engage with the plays in, but the point is, I think fundamentally, you care way more about your profitability and your success. I'm sure Daniel will be effectively able to weigh getting more money as the most material and important thing in this debate. A few points to push back on the Prime Minister's speech, and then simply explaining why I think you better attune to the standards of rich people, particularly the church. That's going to flip all of the stuff on legacy as well. First of all, you are relatively successful. You are not powerful enough to the degree that I think you can trailblaze. Because to a lot of the sort of art world, it is defined by the influence of the single largest people at the time, right? Picasso has the capacity to raise up and push down people to the point where often the top figures in the art world have the ability to dominate trends more than any sort of objective standard. And realistically, there probably isn't a way to objectively measure the quality of one painting or another. It's often only in the subjectivity of the people who value one thing or another. A lot of this style of paintings, there's no way to differentiate. So a lot of the time, these silly types of norms are the ways in which we ascribe relative value to the art product itself. Another issue, I think, is Pat says that there are few artists who do artistic stuff. I think in as far as painting is a relatively replicable art, that is to say you can look at something and you can work very hard on sort of doing through the same things, and if you work directly in an artist's house, you can be taught that and you can teach many people at the same time. Often artists have multiple proteges. I don't think that this assertion works, but there are also comparatively few buyers. So even if there are few people, there are also few buyers, so this leverages out. Let's explain why I think you need to engage in the standards of the day. Who buys art? Two primary actors here that me and Pat agree on. Rich people who want to flex on others. I think this is probably the smaller actor, but in these instances, these people buy art to have conversations with the people they engage with. They don't necessarily care about the quality of the art piece as well. A lot of people don't even necessarily look at these paintings, or just look at god-awful, ugly, boring modern art paintings that maybe have an interesting story and allow rich people to feel as if they're cultured and to peacock in the sort of rich art world. In these instances, those buyers are much, much more likely to privilege a conventional artist because they don't have a lot of time to have a very discerning, unique artistic taste. They buy these as investments, and safe investments are the kinds of things that are very, very similar to the dominant norm of the time. So if you're someone who conforms to this norm, then buyers are much more likely to appreciate and view your work as an effective investment and ability to peacock. But second of all, and I think this is the more important actor here, is the church and other religious actors. Of course, at this time, obviously, the church is such a powerful actor that it feuded with lords. It was able to completely sequester people from their communities. Literally, their mandate is from God, and so they're the largest force in time. And the upshot of this analysis is that this means, as the church, you probably really value this norm because there is some spiritual, divine significance to the work. So if you're the church and you're asking yourself, what kind of artist, and obviously you do believe in this norm, I don't think the average person who's going to a church where this is a dominant norm, if everybody in the church perceived this as lying, then they would kill you for blasphemy like they killed Galileo or whatever, right? So I think obviously there is substantial buy-in from the peasant class and from the kinds of people in the church who make these decisions that this norm is an accepted reality of the day. So when I'm going to some art fair or wherever these sort of purchases are made, and I have art guy one who's like, God inspired me to make this really cool looking painting that is probably marginally indistinguishable from the other paintings on the market, and this other guy is, I worked really hard to make this, but no, God did not divinely inspire me. I'm just a guy who really likes painting. What do you think the church is going to privilege? Obviously, this work of divine spiritual significance, I mean, even if it's a piece of wood, like the kind they used to sell when people would say this was one of the, pieces of the cross that Christ was hung on, if people are willing to buy a piece of wood that they feel has spiritual significance, then I think they're likely to look at a piece of art and really, really care about this. This means, one, that you immediately earn way, way more money because the most important buyer, the church with the most money available, has no interest in buying your works. So a huge amount of the types of sales you are effectively locked out on. This means your capacity to buy rent, your capacity to buy painting supplies, which are often incredibly expensive because dyes and other types of products are really, really expensive because trade is quite weak at this period of history, which then leverages on your capacity to make even better art. Because if you can't afford expensive paint, then you're not going to be able to make the kinds of really valuable paintings that then continue you in a virtuous cycle where you're able to then make more paintings and then sell those paintings for even more money. But as well, I think this also directly pushes into technical expertise, where obviously your adherence to the norm is something that's more likely to accrue you more money than the technical expertise, because the kinds of people making these decisions aren't themselves artists. They're rich businessmen and elites who don't necessarily have the type of discernment to determine what makes a good painting or what makes a fake from an original, right? It's the story and the branding you give it that determines its sale. You also care more about money because your ability to pay for rent, your ability to pay for women at the brothel, your ability to pay for all other kinds of things that, rich artists do. I have no idea, but anything you want to do requires money preconditionally, so more money means more of a capacity to do things. Legacy is completely flipped. Why? Because if nobody is buying your paintings, nobody is preserving them and engaging them. Religious institution is the largest purchaser and maintainer of paintings and art in the entire world. The divine significance that people attribute your works means that they care more than the average painting about maintaining it, because they go, this was a painting that has divine significance to me. So I'm obviously going to ensure that I take it out of a building if there's a fire, or I treat it properly so it doesn't rust and the paint doesn't maintain, so that some person doesn't stab it up because they're bored. I'm pretty sure it's at 7, so it's definitely too late for POI. But thanks everybody. I like art. Art is cool. I love debating. I love you all. Thanks.
Great. DPM?
Are we supposed to like get these bears? Like, what are these bears for? Oh. They're so pretty.
You can get them at IKEA. They're like less than $3.
IKEA has a lot of good things, you know? Yeah.
But were they made by God?
Doesn't look like it.
Depends which your fiddly are we on.
Oh yeah, I don't really have a speech to give. Debate is kind of fun. I'm having a great time. Okay. I think the fundamental mistake of the opposition is that they characterize the people who are buying these art and people who are actually commissioning art creations are people who are somehow, despite the fact that they're in high culture, despite the fact that they're wealthy families who spend a lot of time appreciating high culture and like basically doing things that are personally meaningful to them, but somehow they don't understand anything about the technique of art, despite the fact that that's the education they were forced into from a very early age insofar as being an aristocracy. I think it's very likely that a lot of these people actually, to a very large extent, care about the technique of arts, actually able to discern the ability of arts. The people we're talking about are not some like uncultured swine ruling class like Mark Zuckerbergs, are people who like grew up in religious institution, people who are forced into conforming these norms of like how culture is the defining characteristic of upper class and what separates yourself from the peasant. I think for that reason, a lot of math that you come from up just fall out of this round because people do care about technique of arts. But also secondly, I don't think religious art is the only thing that like they care about insofar as technique matters, and then there's still other characteristic of enjoyment, right? People are not just buying art to flaunt, but also recognize that on our side of the house, the art is presumably is still religious insofar as everyone is religious in that region. You're still gonna claim that like you are like blessed by Jesus and you're creating art in the name of God. There's still a great degree of flexibility to actually like create art in a manner that imposes religious aura on you, or you can create alternative narrative about like because you're being blessed by God, you now have the capacity to create all this art. There's so much more technically sound than the art that everyone else is making. I think for that reason, that is already implicit engaged with a lot of material we get out of art. So what are the structural advantages that you get out of like not practicing Sprezzatura? I think like firstly, Patrick already explained to you why your technique just get better, right? A lot of time the final versions of art that you're making are the things that take the most amount of time. That's like the preparatory works take amount of small, like relatively maybe like take a few months, but then like the final painting on like the big ceilings of the Vatican, like maybe like take a few years and then you spend this tremendous amount of time on it. To the extent that you now have all the preparatory work and manuscript and you're able to be like, okay, like this is the composition I want and how do I actually perfect it? I think like you just learn a lot in that process in a sense that in everything else you do, substantial amount of learning is going back to what you did and what you did wrong and see how you can actually improve upon that. To the extent that you're practicing Sprezzatura, you don't get an opportunity to do that. But also, secondly, just make art more efficiently in the sense that like it's easier for you to make art when you have something to go back to. I think the efficiency case is fairly like intuitive. But also thirdly, I think you get like far more people to actually help you create art to the extent that it's easier for you to now get apprentice because a lot of your incentive to actually get apprenticed is to like, it's the same thing with like when you're debate coaching, like you just like give your like people who you're coaching like shitty cases because like, that you don't want to run. Like I think the same reason why like when you're doing art creation, you can now be like, hey, this is the manuscript that I have work at. You actually have material that you can go like give to your apprentice and be like, hey, this is how you become a good artist. I think that massively incentivizes your ability to actually get people to help you create art, massively incentivizes your clout and your like reputation within like the art communities. So what do those advantages confer to you? A few more characterization of the kind of people who are like patrons who are actually commissioning art, right? I already explained to you why these people grew up in high culture and highly value high culture. I think like within like a very successful aristocratic family, there are probably like at least a few people who actually care like a lot about art. And these are people who are actually gonna be like commissioning the art to these people. I think within the people who are within the institution of the Catholic Church, there are probably a few like cardinals who like care a lot about arts and actually like it's not the case that everyone care about this, but at least the ones that who are actually like in charge of art creations and like commission probably do care about this to a large degree. But also recognize, I'll take you like in the 1 minute or so. But also recognize that a lot of times these art patrons are like spoiled privileged brats who have very specific like demands in the sense that like they want things to be done exactly the way they want it, right? To the extent that you're not practicing Sprezzatura, it's far easier for you to actually do that because you can now have like a manuscript of like give it to your like commissioner and be like, hey, is this what you want? And you go back and you paint it on their wall or you actually do the final version. I think you're far more likely to actually satisfy your patrons instead of like having this final draft and go to their house and paint something that's like completely different on their ceiling. They'll probably get really pissed at you and I don't know, like hire someone to murder you or whatever. But also technical prowess, I think it's just something that's able to differentiate you, right? Assuming that you're gonna willing to buy the framing that a lot of these people, or like substantial portion of these people, care about technique to some capacity. I think like the differentiate at a very top level of artist creation is very small. So whatever art, like technical edge that you can get over other artists make a substantial difference because they're only gonna commission a few arts, and if they're gonna commission it, they're gonna commission the best ones, and that like can be like something that make or break your careers. Here, I'll take the POI.
On buyers and commissioners, there's definitely some who are discerning of the sort of artistic things you're talking about, but why can you get higher fees than on our side when you're locking yourself out of a very large number of the kinds of people who make these purchases, namely religious people who want things that can adhere to this convention?
So I think that like, firstly, I already explained to you why a lot of people who are in the religious institution actually care about technical professions, right? I think like it's not the case that everyone like is about Sprezzatura. That's a dominant trend of art, but it's not the only trend of art in the same way like under the status quo there's dominant trend of art that exists in our world, but that's not the only things that people care about. Where I think like these institutions are not homogenous. But also notice that I think it's also just like less risky to actually like not practice Sprezzatura outside of the house. Insofar as you're now creating art in like a far more efficient manner, you can like sell it to more buyers, you have more potential like opportunities to exposures. I think it's actually like far less risky as opposed to on their side of the house. You're tagging along a trend to cater to a very specific group of buyers. Insofar as you can only create art that like takes a very long time. To the extent that you fail, I think it's catastrophic. I think like even like on our side how the possibility of being extremely successful is the same. On our side, it's safer to actually practice this. Moving on to why legacy matter. I think like assuming that your degree success is fairly the same, I think the reason why you can actually get better legacy outside of the house because you're now leaving a lot of materials for art historians to take up on and actually study. But also secondly, you just leave behind a massive archive. And that like for your students to actually pass on to, you have more influence, you touch more people, you just leave behind like higher amount of stuff. And this works in two different ways. Firstly, you're just objectively more likely to have a better legacy, but also secondly, you feel more optimistic about your legacy because you're actually leaving behind something. You don't feel like you have only created like 4 things in life that is actually not destroyed, and you're banking on all these things being picked up by people that is company feel substantially lower. But also lastly, personal enjoyment, because I actually do think your happiness as artists matter in this round. I think as artists, you probably have a very strong desire and get a lot of satisfaction out of creating the best things you can possibly create. I think that's what, every time you do things that you care about, there's a strong like internal satisfaction of doing things that actually feels good to you, right? To the extent that you can pour all your blood and effort into this and like things that you know you can make the most out of, like I think you can add like far more happiness on that side. For that reason, yeah, do the thing.
DLO.
starting in 3, 2, 1. I might not understand the value of religion because I'm not religious, and I live in a society that is inherently secular where I'm able to opt into different systems of belief and truth. But in a world where there is no free communication, where there is no social media, the truth was the religion, and this was the absolute. This is why we're proud to oppose. I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to go through a case, I'm going to walk and explain why they likely fail on their side of the artists, and that's why they lose, and then after that I'm going to talk about why we better get legacy on our side of the house and mitigation to the rest of their case. But firstly, I want to make an analogy very clear to markets because they talk about markets. You do not differentiate in the market of toothpaste, you make toothpaste. People buy it because it serves its function, and this is exactly the type of market that they have at this time. They mistakenly think that it's about differentiation, but the problem is they miss out that there's a clear opt-in, opt-out. That is, if there's a dominant movement of religion, then having it be divinely ordained is a prerequisite to get the market attention that you need, and it is a necessity. In the same way that toothpaste has to be sure to clean your teeth, you need to make sure that you have to work is going to be divine. And that is an analogy that I'm going to say to win this round. But I'm going to further mechanize that. So firstly, why are you likely to fail on their side as an artist? I have like 5 reasons, but I'll be expanding more on my partner's points. The first thing is that the religion is very dominant and adopted by the broader classes. That is, there's no media, as I mentioned. They basically have no source of truth and meaning. It's been 100 years, which means that people have been raised with this conception of this is how art should be made because it's 15th century and it was 14th century when it started. And therefore, you're often preconceived this to be valuable. They noted the elite are often literally taught by the church, right? They are the individuals that have the greatest capacity of knowledge. They have the ones that have the most institutionalization of it. And so they're often the teachers, which means you have a strong given preconceived notion as the elite in terms of this, which means that it becomes a necessity for the high class to actually partake in these types and customs and justify this, right? People want to buy this because of the fact that it justifies their own rule. These individuals that are very elite are like, I am divinely connected to God, I'm able to buy these works that are divinely connected to God, and therefore this is what separates me from those beneath me that could buy any other artwork. It is literally the differentiator between what me and that peasant could buy. Secondly, people are very partial towards religion and the work that you have. And this is because there's, again, a clear differentiation in here. People are buying the art in this motion because it's very dominant, not just because it's art, but because of its divine connection. The fact that a king is able to go buy from a different royalty some kind of relic from religion, you are now able to partake in this activity exclusive for God and exclusively for this art, and notably, whereas there's a shortage of different relics, you're able to actually engage in it because of the fact that you perceive, or at least you as elite, at least can convince yourself to perceive that these are divine works because you want to make sure that your work and what you're buying is meaningful. And so at the end of the day, what this necessarily suggests is that their side has no investment value because at the time, investment value that you think is clearly connected to that of God. Thirdly, there's no ability to critically assess artwork and norms. That is, I think that they broadly misconstrue what are norms right now for art and not art. They characterize like these art individuals that are people that are like very critical thinking, that were trained in this and are capable of reflecting. The problem is they don't have the same wealth of information we do right now. I'm able to go on the internet and compare different movements, compare different artworks, go to centralized galleries and be able to make my own critical assessments. You are very much limited to how much art you're able to engage with and buy, which means you're more likely to recuse to what those tell you. What, for example, your clergy tells you as to what you should buy, what those around you tell you should buy. And so ultimately, what I'm trying to imply here is that there is a much more dominant force of the effects of what you perceive to be value. That is, when you are the lead, the most important for you is to be included. You want people to perceive the works that you buy as good and for you to be like them, and therefore if you have no capacity to meaningfully critically think about these works and how good they are, and you know everyone else is doing it, then the socialization effect, the in-grouping effect of you needing to be like them is probably much stronger. And I think there's a prisoner's dilemma here, right? Like, why take the risks as like an elite person to differentiate meaningfully without knowing, because there's a lack of communication with other people are doing this too. But the flip side prisoner dilemma is, why would you as an artist do this? Because all the other artists are dominantly following this movement, and the main reason why is because they don't want to be the first one to try to differentiate because they don't want to get screwed over, which means that this dominant norm, and they try to say, but there's other art movements, I'm basically trying to explain to you mechanizing why it's exacerbated, that it actually is very much 99% this movement and 1% theirs. And I think the proof of this intuition is that art movements changed very slowly back then. They were very static, and it's because of the lack of ability to comparison and critically assess in the way that they want to suggest that they do. And then fourthly, I think that there's a structure of the market here that they kind of concede to. You need connections in order to be able to get artwork and commissions, right? So everything here is based off connections, not social media, but interpersonal ones, which means you benefit on our side by being perceived as divine, right? You are able to be able to, hey, like I am someone that could speak to the words of God and kind of share this special moment with you in terms of the artwork that I produce, so you could flash this, invest it, or appreciate its artwork. But on their side of the house, these are things that you don't get. You are socially ostracized because you go to people and they ask you the bare minimum condition: does your toothpaste work? Or in other sense, is it divine? And it does not work or serve their function. Ultimately, I think Diggory also wins on this point because he explains to you how church has the most amount of money. He explains to you how they have the capacity to accrue money over time. They've been able to wield the divine to generate more wealth from the elites, and they have the most incentive to produce artwork in order to honor the divine, which means your greatest market is instantly lost, which means you're not able to, for example, in a market that's very small, art at that time is not very huge and it's very hard to get work, you're not able to maximize work. You have periods where you're not doing anything or selling anything or creating your own works that are not personalized to the patrons that want it, which you said you want patrons and they're the ones who are supposed to get it. If you meaningfully create artwork, no one's going to buy it. Yes?
The problem though is that when you say you're guided by God, you have to make the same type of work as everybody else guided by God. That is, you can't make anything subversive, non-religious, etc. That is a clear way.
And that's perfect. That's what you should be doing in order to succeed in a market that expects this of you. I don't understand. All right, why you probably care about legacy less, or at least it's distorted. The first thing is that this is a pessimistic knowledge question. That is, you only know what you know. You're incapable of understanding about what worked 100 years ago or what works 100 years from now, and therefore, you can't just say legacy prospectively from the year 2024. You have to think about it in the context of the actor and the knowledge that they have. They perceive this as more successful. Secondly, a recency bias. Think about how the fact that you think you're probably going to have a trajectory of success if this is what's normal, and therefore that probably leads you to believe, and this is important, they might win on absolute legacy. I'm talking about perceived legacy. The fact that I perceive that I am doing things in order to leave an impact, I think we get more of that on their side, even if it's not objective, and that's what you should be weighing at an actor motion. Thirdly, the alignment to the art norm. You probably think that you're doing well because you're with the art norm. And lastly, if we prove to you successfully get more business, which we think we undoubtedly did, then seeing wealth is a practical indicator of legacy, right? Seeing people buy your work, appreciate it, means that you feel like you're doing something right. Their side doesn't have that because you have the opposite, non-reaffirmations, which means you feel bad on the journey towards legacy. I want to say then, why do they not get legacy? Firstly, I think Diggory had an amazing mechanism. This is actually phenomenal, but no one preserving artworks, right? The problem is that there's so many externalities. Works change hands. It's not possible to make sure that there are all art galleries, people's houses gets burned down, there's coup d'etats, but religious institutions get protected because of the divine and necessity, which means that only then are you able to get that future perspective benefit of legacy that they want to talk about. But secondly, you won't just be as popular, which popularity is a prerequisite to the legacy you want. If no one's buying it and collecting it, then there's no reason it's going to happen. Some responses to their case. First thing they say is you create better art because you retain art. My first mitigation here is this motion says that you're not necessarily making preparatory work, but you're deleting it, which means you still do that. You still go through the motions of creating good artwork and still going through the process of exploration, which means that I'm not clear that this is a meaningful differentiation in terms of retaining art. The second thing is that you won't sell, and I think this is a big meaningful differentiator. That is, I think this is a margin debate. It says you're a relatively successful artist, which means you probably have accrued skills from decades of actually training. So the margin of the gap between the binary of your divine art or not versus the margin of your art is a little bit better is a much larger critical difference in terms of the purchaser and what they want to get. And the third thing is that the market isn't incredibly large, which means creating more work on their side, they say, oh, you can retain things, doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually going to sell it, because by their own mechanism, this is a patron-based economy, which means meaninglessly creating works does nothing. You probably have a limited capacity as to how much art you could even make in the first place. This isn't like an infinite factory generator as to how much you could do. And then lastly, I think that ultimately, the better, I talked about betterness of art. Okay, next what they say is you can have a lot more clout because you are able to retain your things and show it to individuals that are apprentices. I think you probably benefit more from being divine, right? Being infallible, because now what you say is connected to the word of God. When you tell individuals and your disciples this is what you should do, they won't question you, which means you probably have an easier job doing it, and they probably relish you and appreciate you more, you're godly. And so they probably appreciate you more and are more likely to follow you and stay with you. And they probably comparatively leave you on their side of the house because they just go to the divine person. They're gonna be like, oh yeah, I want to work under someone that's literally godly, could see visions about how to create beautiful artworks. Lastly, they said you're able to have more meaning. The problem is that they self-admitted that this is a commission-based economy and patron-based economy, which means you're always gonna be creating artwork that you don't find meaningful and that you could actually do. Just because you keep your art preparation doesn't necessarily mean a tipping point. Wayne, one, you could fall out of favor very quickly on their side of the house because of your actions that you do, which are irreparable to your reputation that matters and the connections that you have, because other people could just quickly replace you, and you only have skills as an artist, which means you become poor, you starve, you die, and you can't perpetually live a good life, which I think is important. But two, there's a relative perception of legacy that we inherently win on. So both on the practical in terms of accessing the market, and in terms of all the legacy arguments, I think we're clearly winning. You want to be perceived as someone that's godly because it is the time that you live in. It is better to necessarily fall in line and just be a normal toothpaste than try to differentiate.
Here.
Debate. That was lit.
The key turning point in this debate is whether or not opposition was sufficiently able to prove that you get no clout within this market. They provide actually quite plausible mechanization, in fact, quite strong mechanization, if I'm being honest, about why it is that you're likely to have, in certain contexts of the market, be less successful. Let's take that at its best case and just weigh this out. That is, we provide equalization mechanisms about why it is likely that you're going to see some success within the market, right? What are these and how do these clash out? That is, they tell you that generally religious people are going to prefer religious art. Note that they say that in a very fancy way, but that is what their argument boils down to, that there's preferences. This doesn't engage with Kai's material about why it is that there's likely to be some preferencing of technical expertise. That is, the types of work that they are commissioning in this period are particularly elaborate, and that technical material is very important and prioritized. But it also doesn't engage with the second element of Kai's speech, which is, at least at the top of the speech, which is about how it is that this invoking these religious norms is likely to constrain you in certain ways beyond just forfeiting that ability to be technically maximized. What this specifically was is in terms about why it is that when you are saying your work is blessed by God, that is going to constrain the themes and sort of stuff about your material. Now, note, Kai didn't particularly impact this, but that is there at the present. But what this means is that you're at least able to create art that is different, whether it be technically maximized or creating different types of art that differentiate within the market. I think that they were able to prove that certainly some people who are religious are not going to commission your art. But that's not particularly important, because consider the mechanics of art at this time. You're doing large-scale, long-term projects like commissioning murals at a Italian palace, right? These take many years of work and are highly technical in the sense that there's a lot of work going into it. There's lots of there's lots of elements of it. It would be like if we were to plaster this entire room with massive paintings, right? I think this is intuitive and what we're talking about when we say stuff like the work in the Vatican. What that means then is it actually doesn't matter if you're able to have full-scale capture of the market like they said. So I think that what they failed to do is that they failed to definitively show that you don't have any access within the market. That is, we're able to provide mechanisms as to why it is that there's going to be some level of success. What this is able to do to show why we win this debate, then, is that we are then able to impact all the other material that I would like to point out is often untouched by opposition. That is, they never engage with your personal relationship with art, how you're going to do that, how you're going to avoid burnout, and how you're going to be able to then produce the best kind of expertise possible. So what flows then is that, look, obviously we have to accept some trade-off in success in the market just based on how this round has gone. But we're willing to bite that harm because we think all of the impacts weigh out in this favor. That is, you're still succeeding in the market somewhat, but you have a better protection of this legacy. Why do we win on the idea of legacy? There is a very key mechanism that I think is very interesting from Kai that I don't think sees any engagement with. That is that you're able to do things like pass down your preparatory work to your students. In their world, where you have to destroy it, you don't have the ability to engage with that way. That has an outgrowth effect in the sense that now your students are probably going to be producing work like you, which is going to garner your legacy that way. You're also engaging in the technical thing. That is, that you have a consistent style over many different periods that have the ability to be preferenced in the technical style. This is what's likely to survive and people are going to want. But moreover, and I think this is the best material on our case, which is Kai's material about how it is that you're engaging with these patricians. That is, they're likely to be very picky about the types of work that they do. They're likely to say, I want to mural like what exists within the Medici Palace. What happens then is that you're able to produce exactly what they want. So you can, again, differentiate in the market that way, and there's some level of demand because they want that work. You can produce it for them because you have the preparatory work necessary. They completely miss our mechanism of what the significance of preparatory work is. That is, it significantly cuts down the time for preparing work and engaging in it that way, because you don't need to do massive figure studies for planning murals every time you want to do any art project. You can instead roll it over and get that benefit that way. At the end of this debate then, yes, we're probably not going to be as competitive within the market. But instead what you're able to do is get some level of capture, get a more positive relationship with your art, and be able to make a bigger impact on the art world rather than doing what literally everybody else is doing, because of the way Sprezzatura, even though it is about process, likely defines also the content of your art in the sense that it's going to have to fundamentally be religious, otherwise you can't say it's touched by God, you will literally be killed, right? So I think that fundamentally at the end of this debate, we are able to differentiate ourselves in the market, get unique things, and secure our legacy that way. Proud to propose.
Great. Hang tight. We'll be back soon.